we're not being told just because we're not ready for it.
Radio stations of frequency, vibrational.
I was a homicide detective with LAPD.
UFOs increase, visitations. Uncovering the real Jack the Ripper. I'm Tony Sweet. Welcome to another episode of Truth Be Told. Today we're joined by acclaimed true crime author Sarah Bax Horton to discuss her revealing book, One-Armed Jack, Uncovering the Real Jack the Ripper. Together we'll navigate the murky waters of the Victorian London, dissecting new evidence and theories that bring us closer to identifying this legendary criminal. Sarah's search challenges long-held beliefs and sheds light on the psychological, forensic, and societal elements that have enshrined Jack the Ripper in history. This episode isn't just about tracking the murder, it's a tribute to the pursuit of truth, such as Truth Be Told. Join us for a captivating exploration of one of history's greatest figures. We're promising intrigue, suspense, and underlying quest for answers. The journey into the heart of darkness begins now on Truth Be Told. I'm your host, Tony Sweet. Please welcome to the Truth Be Told studios for the first time, true crime author Sarah Bax Horton. Hello, Miss Sarah.
Hi, Tony.
So glad you're here, and thank you for staying up late, being in London. So I appreciate and even setting the scene of the original crime itself.
Absolutely.
Well. First of all, I always like to find out, when there's somebody bringing on a topic or a subject that inspired them to write about or research, or so I'm curious, what made you want to write about this legendary serial killer, Jack the Ripper?
In early 2017, I was doing some family history research, and I just found out by chance that my great-great-grandfather, Harry Garrett, was a Metropolitan Police officer who served on the Jack the Ripper investigation. And he joined the Metropolitan Police aged 20, spent 15 years in southeast London on the beat, and was promoted to sergeant, transferring into Whitechapel in January 1888, when the crimes began in August of that year. And he was actually posted to the main police station at Lemon Street, which became Ripper headquarters.
Wow. And what inspired you to actually write the book, though? Because, I doing family history of my own, I find people in my family history that had influenced, with America or fought in the Revolutionary War. Some of them are like, oh my gosh, this would be a great story. And some of them you're like, it's great, but I'll move on. What made you want to pursue the writing of the book?
I was just fortunate in my timing because I had taken a year's unpaid sabbatical from work just to pursue my hobbies and interests and have a bit of time off. And I made the discovery in that year off, and I had the time to do some really consistent research about my police ancestor and the Jack the Ripper case. And then I thought, I don't want to go back to work. I'm going to enroll on a writing course and write a book. So that's what happened. And I didn't realize it would take me about 6.5 years to complete the book and get published, but it's been worth it.
And a lot of people, when they do research, sometimes they find other people's research and, they kind of use the research to create their own mystery and their own conclusion. But where did you start? Where did you begin? Because, a great story starts with a beginning that especially when you want to entertain people, you want to really start with, kind of like that spark that keeps them reading. So what was your first step of putting this book together? Where did you start?
I went to the Metropolitan Police Museum and Archives, which is based in West London. And they hold some old police registers which gave information about the date that my ancestor held certain collar numbers, so which identified him and his role. And they really helped me to understand late Victorian policing, how the metropolis was split up into alphabetically named divisions, how the beats worked, how the constables were managed by the sergeants, and so on, how Scotland Yard detectives operated. And they really helped and supported me a tremendous amount. And over time, they realised that I was very serious about finding out more about the Jack the Ripper investigation and, in fact, pursuing a fresh modern take on the case.
Did you go from your great-grandfather's perspective, or how did you go about it? Was it more about the research that from his perspective, or the case itself with Jack the Ripper?
I was fascinated by the case itself, and because I wrote the book in honor of my police ancestor, I was interested to know what the police of the day said about the case and about the killer. And I discovered, to my surprise, that CID Chief Robert Anderson said publicly that the case had been solved and that the identity of the killer was known without a shadow of a doubt. And Anderson published a memoir in 1910, and around that time he did numerous newspaper interviews which reiterated this view that the case had been solved, but that the criminal could not be prosecuted because the best witness was reluctant to testify in court.
Wow. Yeah, and a lot of people have had their own, like I said, their own version of who the killer was throughout the years, through their own books and TV shows and movies. Where do you go from when you're starting with your writing the book of, okay, they say this is the person that murdered, but with, being over 100 and some years ago, they didn't have the technology that we have today. How do you begin to even try to solve your own theories? Luckily you're there in London. Like, it would be more difficult for me to do it here in Los Angeles. But how did you start weeding people out of who you thought did or did not do it?
I realised that from what Robert Anderson had said, that it was possible to draw up a profile of the unnamed individual. What Anderson said was that the man was a Polish Jew, an East Ender, who lived in the immediate vicinity of the murder locations, and who was low class, so working class, and probably living on the poverty line. Again, he said there was no doubt as to the person's identity, and that the killing started when the killer suffered from what he called mania or paroxysms, meaning fits, and ended when he was admitted, in the parlance of the day, into a lunatic asylum. And another officer said that the Ripper was held at Stepney Workhouse and Colney Hatch Lunatic Asylum. while Anderson's wife added that he was held at Stone near Dartford. Of course, my suspect, Chaim Hyams, was held at all three of those locations, and moreover, he suffered from severe epilepsy and was violent and dangerous for a period of days after fitting. And this fits again with Anderson's theory about the man suffering from mania, and it was called epileptic mania, and paroxysms, meaning fits. And I took it literally that these were literally the epileptic fits. And from Chaim's medical files, I'm in no doubt that that was the case.
One thing that stood out to me is they said about Polish. How did they come to that conclusion of finding an actual nationality of the person?
So basically, the Jewish people were actually banished from the UK for a period of time up until about the 1600s when they were readmitted. And after that time, we had two different faith groups settle in the UK. And so the Ashkenazi Jews were called Polish Jews because they tended to come from Eastern Europe and Russia. And then we had the Sephardic Jews who were from the Mediterranean, so Spain and Portugal. And so that term can refer to people who were native Brits, who'd lived here possibly for centuries, and it really referred to people of the Ashkenazi faith, which is the case in this instance because Jack the Ripper was a true East Ender and spoke colloquial English and in what was described as a mild voice with a mild manner. And he was very much a local man, although being of Jewish descent.
How many years or how long did the killings go on? And when did the end? Because like you said, they really didn't have someone that they put in prison. So when did it begin and how long did it last? And then when did it end?
So this is a very good question because the Metropolitan Police files, which are still in existence today, cover a period between sort of beginning of 1888 through into the 1890s. And in fact, there are 11 unsolved deaths on those files. But when we look at Jack the Ripper specifically, and different people have different theories about this, he's generally held to have killed 5 women, what we call the canonical 5, in an extremely short period of time, perhaps 2.5 months, between August and November 1888. In my analysis, I do have him killing 6 women, so a prior murder in early August 1888. And I also believe that 2 non-fatal attacks in 1888 are illuminating about his modus operandi. And I cover all of this in my book.
And for those that tuned in after the intro, the book is called One-Armed Jack, Uncovering the Real Jack the Ripper. And our guest is Sarah Bax Horton. And I'm curious because a lot of times when somebody does kill somebody, and especially in a serial killer mode, they don't want to risk getting caught. So they may go and spread out to a different part of the city, even to different areas that may be outside of the city. Was all the killings in the same area of the city?
They were in quite a tightly
Hmm.
enclosed area. My prime suspect, East End cigar maker Chaim Hyams, lived on Wentworth Street, and this is really in the epicenter of the Ripper murder locations. And really, they are walkable. All five or six locations are walkable in an easy couple of hours. And somebody plotted the canonical five murder locations on a map. It was a retired police officer,
Hmm.
and he deduced from those locations where he believed the killer lived, as in those days, probably somebody who lived within easy walking distance
Right.
of them. And if you add my sixth victim, Martha Tabram, into that calculation, it brings the epicenter of those murder locations to the exact spot on Wentworth Street where Chaim Hyams lived. So he literally did walk out of his house, commit the murders. Sometimes he did take an indirect route home, and we see that after the murder of the fourth of the canonical five, Catherine Eddowes, where he was chased from the scene by the City of London police and hid out in an apartment block in artisans' dwellings. And in fact, that's where Hyam's brother Mark lived.
Hmm.
And then from there, he took a direct route home, but he went via Goulston Street, where he dropped a bloodied corner of Catherine Eddowes' apron. And he also wrote some words of protest in chalk on a wall. And when we plot those locations, it is in direct line to Hyam's dwelling on Wentworth Street. So all of those different hideouts and spots are exactly in his escape route home.
Why do you think Jack the Ripper is still so in the news? Why are we so interested in this? Five women that were, yes, unsolved. It was a tragedy, but why worldwide, not even just in the London area, but worldwide, why are we still interested in this particular incident?
I think there are so many different reasons, and maybe if you ask different people, they would give you a different
Right.
answer than I'm going to give you. However, I really think that Jack the Ripper was the first modern serial killer. The press coverage and sensationalism was extreme. There was great fear on the streets of Whitechapel. The case at the time attracted the interest of Queen Victoria, who made personal inquiries about it and was very keen to preserve life and not have further murders, blighting the East End of London.
Hmm.
And I think also because, as you mentioned, the murders are very limited to a very small area in Whitechapel. And so we do have the sense of place, the idea of Whitechapel as being very crime-ridden, being full of destitute people,
Right.
very evocative after dark, and the terrifying concept of this killer, who at the time was seen to have sort of almost supernatural powers, because how else could he escape being seen, heard, and captured? So I think there are many reasons that it somehow got into the popular imagination, and people have kept it alive through books, theories, photographs, walking tours, and so on. They have kept it alive until the current day.
I want to go back to the women because serial killers normally, not saying all, have a characteristic that they choose their victim, how they choose their victims. Mostly, of course, I'm going to show a picture. that I found on the internet. I'm hoping these are the 5 that. But what was the similarities that you think Jack the Ripper chose these women to murder?
I think you're right about the victimology. They were all casual prostitutes, so they were vulnerable and available and connected with sex work. And we know that Jack the Ripper was considered to be a misogynist and that his crimes were sexually motivated. So perhaps understandable that he directed his violence towards this type of woman. And on the whole, they were quite close in age, with an outlier of the last victim, Mary Jane Kelly, who was only 24. But apart from that, they were on average late 30s, early 40s. And in my analysis, I believe that he made a mental association between them and his wife, because my prime suspect, Chaim Hyams, who suffered from insanity as well as epilepsy, he also suffered from paranoia and was delusional. And he had a violent antipathy towards his wife. And we have 2 recorded events where he tried to kill her. And he also tried to attack her on several occasions when she visited him, when he was being held in secure medical facilities. He believed that his wife was unfaithful to him with men who included his own brothers. And I think we can probably assume that this was paranoia. And he seems to have directed his hatred out onto the women of the street.
So again, we don't know his background. And like I said, I showed a picture of him. And I mean, just looking at a picture, you can't really tell if somebody has mental illness or not. But I'm assuming that this picture is probably at a point when he did have mental illness. What did he do? What was his background for job wise, and was he Jewish, Polish Jew also, or?
Yes, so he was an Ashkenazi Jew, born and raised in the East End of London, of a family who were fruiterers, so they sold oranges and lemons. And he was the oldest child. And he fits the FBI profile of Jack the Ripper, which was drawn up in 1988, 100 years after the first ever criminal profile, which was also done of Jack the Ripper by police surgeon Thomas Bond. And what the FBI said about Jack the Ripper's family background was that he was possibly lacking a parent or lacking paternal supervision. And in fact, Hyams' father died when Hyams was a child. And his mother was dominant, which is what the FBI also assessed. And Hyams took on at a very early age, as the oldest child, responsibility for being an additional wage earner and so on in the family. And the FBI also said that Jack the Ripper would have had some sort of condition, which was for him psychologically crippling. And in my analysis, this is the severe epilepsy, because it wasn't well treated in those days or well understood. And so to have these severe fits, whereby he also lost control of his bladder and bowels, and which may have also caused brain damage, would have been a very traumatic experience for him. And I believe that is part of his psychological and physical disorders, which led him to this decline and an escalation in violence across the murders.
Yeah. I know just watching a lot of the documentaries about serial killers, a lot of them in public are very articulate, smart, sometimes even pleasant people to be around, but behind closed doors they're monster-like, and like you said, there's like that switch in the brain where it just almost like a snap, and then they definitely turn into something that's the old saying, Jekyll and Hyde type of thing. Do you know if that was the case where in public he was kind of a noble man in the public wise, or was he like that kind of the angry man always?
So we have his medical files, which were only released to the public in 2013 and
Oh, wow.
2015.
Wow.
Yes.
That's pretty cool.
And there's a lot of information on the medical files. And his wife described him when he was in his right mind as being kind, civil,
Yep.
and attentive. However, when he had these epileptic seizures, in the days afterwards, he was extremely violent and dangerous and a completely different person. And this is recorded in his medical files and might explain the periodicity of the murders, which is also another question as to why there were, albeit small gaps, there were distinct gaps between the killings, as I mentioned, of as much as 4 or 5 weeks. And on one occasion, he killed 2 women on the same night. And it's thought that because he was interrupted in the murder of the first woman, and so he fatally cut her throat, but he was unable to carry out the abdominal mutilations, which gave him gratification, that he went on and killed a second woman, Catherine Eddowes, and on that occasion he was not interrupted, although the City of London police did claim at the end to have chased him from the scene.
Now, whatever happened to him? Did he end up dying, which caused the killings to stop, or why did the killing stop if he was not jailed, or did he go into a mental facility permanently?
What happened to Chaim Hyams was that the last Ripper murder took place on the 7th of November in 1888. And shortly after Christmas of that year, he was apprehended by the police on Lemon Street, very close to the police station that was the headquarters of the Ripper investigation. And he was detained as what was called a wandering lunatic because he was an alcoholic and he was suffering from alcohol withdrawal syndrome, which can cause hallucinations. And he was taken to a police court and entered into Stepney Workhouse Infirmary for treatment. He was in for 3 weeks, and when released, he was out for 3 months before his next detention. And I just note that the City of London police claim to have had their prime suspect as Jack the Ripper under surveillance for a 3-month period. In my analysis, that could be January to April 1889, when Hyams was at large. He then attempted to kill his wife, and he was sent to Colney Hatch Lunatic Asylum in a straitjacket. And this is interesting because one of the main detectives on the case said that the Ripper was detained and taken away with his hands tied behind his back. And I did wonder whether it was the straitjacket being alluded to. And he was detained, but for some unknown reason, released for 1 week at the end of August and beginning of September 1889. Again, tried to stab his wife with a knife. And from then on, he was in secure medical facilities for the rest of his life. And in fact, he died in 1913 of what was called exhaustion from epilepsy and cardiovascular degeneration.
That's pretty interesting how that all happened and then the killings stopped. So that's, that's kind of leans towards who he was. I do have a question from the chat room, so if you don't mind, I'd love to ask from one of our listeners. It says, what about the old police department and forensic science made it so Jack wasn't caught back then? How do you think the case of Jack the Ripper would be handled nowadays?
Nowadays, we have the advantage of forensics, which they didn't have then.
Right.
They could determine if blood was from a mammal or not, but they didn't even have any form of blood groups, and they couldn't definitively say, I believe it was human blood. So they had quite practical, prosaic techniques. They might take an imprint of a footprint using plaster of Paris. Clearly, they would examine any weapons they found. And the police surgeons were very highly trained, and in their post-mortem examinations, they would detail the type of weapon that they believed would have caused the wounds, and also whether the killer was right or left-handed, and so on. So they did a great deal of analysis and very interesting thinking around the case, but it was quite difficult to prove evidentially and to get convictions. I mean, also today we have like ubiquitous CCTV and so on,
Right.
and we can be tracked via our mobile phones. I certainly take mine everywhere with me. So I do think it's probably, I hesitate to say easier, but there are certainly more tools and techniques available today. But I do think the police of the day did an excellent job. They put their best men on the case. They realized early on that they had a serial killer at large, which they took extremely seriously. They flooded the area with plainclothes detectives, and they did door-to-door inquiries, posted up appeals for information, and they processed a huge number of public inquiries, offers of information, letters, and so on. So they were so busy that regularly about 100 men from other divisions had to be drafted in to assist them.
I was going to ask you about that, thinking that due to it was five, maybe six prostitutes that did they put their best men in action versus if it was, one of the elites, the business owner or something like that's wife, if that would have changed the mood of the police. But that was, that you pretty much answered that then.
Yeah, I mean, everyone's life was of equal value,
Right.
and they did put their best men on the case. Queen Victoria, as I said, made direct inquiries to say this must be stopped. And in fact, the case toppled the police commissioner of the day because of his failure to solve the case after the fifth murder in succession. The police officers individually worked all hours, and in fact, they would give money from their own pocket to women they found on the street to get them into lodging houses where they would be safe. And they also appealed to the women not to put themselves in danger, but that was difficult because the women were, I question whether they were sometimes quite fearless, but maybe they felt that they were on home territory. Maybe they knew the men that they were
Right.
consorting with. They were certainly desperate and in need of money, and they made these judgment calls which were not always wise.
Yeah. 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 I know getting involved in reading documents and hearing about cases like this, could it have gotten overwhelming? Because it's not like you're researching just a historical figure, but one that's it's all about murder and it's not just murder, but gruesome murder. Was it ever overwhelming or too much for you of reading some of the accounts at all?
Something that really helped me is that because I wrote the book in honor of my police ancestor, and I was so impressed by the way the police handled the case, and I really tried to follow in their footsteps. That helped me, I think, maintain quite an analytical perspective. And I never wanted to write a sensational book,
Hmm.
and I haven't. I do believe it's thrilling, and I do believe that it's quite challenging and offers alternative interpretations of the murders and, in fact, the Ripper himself. But I suppose I was on a quest for truth and looking at the historical facts, and I really wanted to do it as a kind of passion project.
Yeah, yeah, and I, it's great that you did it in honor of your ancestor. I think that's a great thing because I would do the same if it was for a family member. It's to honor them. So,
Yeah.
well, before we get out of here, I do have a question, and it's actually another question from somebody in the chat room, and they said, "Is there any other cases you would like to inquire about? For example, the case of the Zodiac killer. Now that you've kind of dipped your toe into the serial killer realm, is there any other cases that you might want to, and kind of a no pun intended, a jab at?"
Okay. Well, my second book is going to be published later this year, and it covers the Thames Torso killer, who
Oh.
was a serial killer active at the same time as Jack the Ripper
Hmm.
between 1887 and 89, killed four women
Hmm.
in probably central London, but had a completely different modus operandi. So he dismembered the women and discarded their remains across central London and in the tidal Thames. And so I have a new prime suspect as that killer. And that's it's sort of been my next project.
That's wonderful. And after you release the book, and once again, the book is called One Arm Jack, um, was there any other new information or anything that you said, "Oh, I should have put that in there. That would have been another great, compelling theory or evidence that you forgot"? Or did you feel like this is a full, complete case closed?
I believe that I've done the best job of anyone over the past over 135
Wow, that's
years
great.
in compiling an evidence-based case against a suspect, because my prime suspect had physical characteristics: a stiff left arm from a broken elbow,
Hmm.
and a very unusual way of walking. He couldn't bend or extend his knees, and he walked with asymmetric foot dragging. And these characteristics were noted by eyewitnesses in the Ripper case, as were the physical description, which matches Hyam's. So his height and weight and sort of general appearance, broad-shouldered, even his way of speaking with a very mild manner and a slight hesitancy of speech. And these are all recorded not only by eyewitnesses, but in Hyam's medical files. And I don't believe that anyone else will be able to find a suspect that is so compelling a match.
And last question, did you reach out to, or did you try to find anybody that might be related to Hyams or any of the victims' family that maybe still exist or knew about, that to talk to them about any of the case itself?
I haven't regarding Hyams, because I was so lucky to discover my police ancestor, and it's a source of great pride to me.
Right.
And I felt it would be quite unfair to sort of try to contact anyone who wouldn't probably be able to comment anyway, owing to the passage of time. Regarding your earlier question, I don't feel I fully answered it, because I'd like to add that I do think other people will take the ideas and concepts in my book and maybe develop them further, and there might be a lot of cause for further study. And I'd be delighted by that, because I feel that now the case, in my opinion, is closed. I don't feel that's the end of the story. I think other people might come along and comment on my race day theory. So there is a coincidence between the dates of the murders and big horse racing events in the metropolitan area. And so I do believe that other people might have a very interesting say about my book, and that hopefully the study will continue.
I would love to, from hearing your story, I would actually love to see a movie or a TV series, or probably more movie, from Hyam's perspective, even though, 100% there's still that little like, oh, he may not be, but I think it would be great to actually see the perspective coming from his side as the serial killer. I think that would be interesting, because we always see it from, the detective side, or, but never the killer side. So I think that would be a great TV show or movie. So maybe you have to reach out to somebody and see if they can make that happen.
My book has been optioned by a TV production company. So watch this space.
Fingers crossed.
Thank you. And in my book, I do true crime reconstructions for each of the murders, whereby I put forward an idea of how and where he accosted the women. I run through the murders, and I propose an escape route, because, how did he get away undetected? And I think that one of the reasons was that the police drew up a cordon around Whitechapel to try to catch the murderer as he crossed it. And my prime suspect lived within the cordon, so he never crossed the cordon.
Wow, that is amazing. Well, I am so delighted to have you, but please, will you come back and when your new book comes out, and I would love to have you and be a part of Truth Be Told again and tell us that story.
Thank you very much. I'd love to.
Perfect. Well, everybody go get the book. You can go to Amazon and pick it up. It's One Arm Jack, Uncovering the Real Jack the Ripper by Sarah Bax Horton. And Sarah, thank you so much for being on Truth Be Told.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And everybody, thank you for tuning in, asking your questions. Please share the show and like it, and subscribe. Leave us some great comments. We love to hear from you. And please tune in every Friday for Truth Be Told with me and Robert Hensley on Monday at 3, and Bonnie Burkert that does the Truth Be Told transformation on Wednesday at 3 for the Club Paranormal Network. So until next time, I'm Tony Sweet. Oh, yeah, and don't forget, go to earthlybeings.org. I have launched my nonprofit that we would love to have you join and donate and volunteer for projects and events coming up when it comes to preserving ancient civilizations and anything that's dealing with ancient cultures, religions, and traditions. So we'd love to have you join us on that. So earthlybeings.org. Until next time, I'm Tony Sweet. Have a good one and take care of yourself and each other. Bye-bye.